Welcome everyone to our annual Parents League Financial Aid panel. I'm Gina Mallon, Executive Director of the Parents League of New York. And before we begin, I'd like to thank our staff, our board, and all of you for supporting this event tonight. This is one of our signature programs at the Parents League, and I promise you it will be a very informative evening. And a great big thank you to all of our panelists who are here with us tonight, and Laura Danforth, our moderator. For those of you who are not familiar with the Parents League, we are the only nonprofit institution of its kind in New York City. And for over 100 years, we have been bringing families and schools together by providing up-to-date information about independent schools and supporting and guiding all of you through the independent schools admissions process. And if you're not already a member, I encourage you to join the Parents League. This can be a very daunting and intimidating process, the admissions process and the financial aid process. So we are here to help you. So as a member, you will receive unlimited advice and support. We also offer a financial aid discounted membership. So you could learn more about membership and the financial aid membership on our website at parentsleague.org. And now onto our program. We are so honored to have with us a very distinguished and highly experienced group of financial aid officers who will walk you through the financial aid process this evening. And following their presentation, which we plan to be very brief because we really want to leave plenty of time for questions from all of you. And as far as questions, please type your questions in the Q&A feature when we are done with our presentation. And Laura, our moderator, will present those questions to our panelists. And we really hope to get to as many questions as we can during this session, which will end at 8 p.m. And if we don't get to your question, please email us at info@parentsleague.org. So we really are here to help. And now, speaking of our moderator, I am so pleased to introduce Laura Danforth, head of the Master's School. The Master's School is a rigorous co-educational college preparatory school, day school and boarding school, located on 96 stunning acres in Dobbs Ferry, New York, and it serves students in grades 5th through 12th grade. Laura is a 30-year veteran of independent schools, and she also serves on the board of NYSACE, which is the New York State Association of Independent Schools, and TABS, which is the Association of Boarding Schools, and also the Parents League. I don't think Laura ever sleeps. So she is a deeply, deeply committed educator, and the Master's School is deeply committed to financial aid, awarding $6 million to 26% of its students. And now I'd like to turn it over to Laura. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Gina. And it's great to be here tonight with such a wonderful group of colleagues of mine in independent schools. And I also am a proud board member of the Parents League. And it's great to get to know you. And it was wonderful to have you on the campus a couple of years ago. So I just want to just start very briefly to welcome everyone tonight, where I'm sitting in the head's house here on our campus in Dobbs Ferry. We had a great in-person school day today, and look forward to welcoming other students tomorrow. We have 4 more grades coming in tomorrow, so it's been a great start for us. We have 150 kids from all around the world, and they are working remotely right now. And I know we have a boarding person here tonight as well, and I'm sure he'll talk about that experience. So let me just say that, in my opinion, I had 3 of our kids go through independent schools, and so we applied for financial aid for those schools and for colleges, and The financial aid process is very personal, and it can be uncomfortable. And I just want to name that if you haven't been through this process before. You will be asked to disclose a lot of detail about about your family and the choices that you make with your money as a family. Rest assured that my colleagues and here tonight and financial aid professionals at the schools that you apply to take their job very, very seriously. And they work hard to protect your privacy and will keep conversations that you have personal and your personal information confidential at all times, because they know how important this decision is for you and your family. I don't think there's any decision that's more important than how a family spends their money if you choose the independent school route. The people on this panel and their colleagues at other schools are here to help guide you and your family through this process. Financial aid budgets at many schools are robust, but they're finite. It's always worth applying for financial aid. And it's important to know that most financial aid officers treat financial aid like triage and offer grants to the neediest families first. And that's an important question that you ask when you go into the process. Is what is your school's philosophy around financial aid? It's important that you know that. Most of the schools are very similar, but it's important that you ask that to the admissions folks that you work with. And I'll just end by saying overall, it's important to remember that our schools and the Parents League care deeply about access and about equity, and financial aid is a tool to support those values. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves right now, just very briefly, and then we'll jump into a handful of questions that we've prepared, that I prepared for them, and then we'll take your questions. So let's start with Jessica. If you could unmute and
Sure.
just introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, Laura, everyone. And Laura, thank you so much for what you just said. It really speaks to how we think about financial aid for families. And thank you to the Parents League for hosting this event, and to all of you for being here tonight. I'm Jessica Anzelone. I'm the Associate Director of Admissions and the Director of Financial Aid at the Bank Street School for Children. The school is located on the Upper West Side at West 112th Street and Broadway. Bank Street is a nursery to 8th grade school with about 400 students. And in this current moment, an immense amount of work has gone into opening school as safely as possible in person, and creating a robust learning experience for students both in person and learning remotely at home. We are a progressive school committed to social justice, community, and advocacy, which are all at our core. And Bank Street is passionately committed to building a diverse community of learners that reflects our city and our world. Our school has a very strong commitment to socioeconomic diversity, which enriches the educational opportunity for all families. On average, more than 40% of our students receive financial aid, and a significant portion of our operating budget is dedicated to supporting financial aid.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. Xiomara.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Xiomara Hall. I'm the Director of Enrollment Management at the Chapin School, which is located on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Chapin is an historically all-girls K-12 with about 800 students. With regards to financial aid, I sit in an advisory role on the financial aid committee at Chapin, but I have had the opportunity to look at a very broad range of financial aid models through my work at both day schools, boarding schools in New York City, Pennsylvania, and DC. So I hope that I have some knowledge that I've picked up along the way that can be helpful to someone on this call. Chapin is proud to be able to support our families with close to $7 million in need-based award. And that percentage is just under 22% of our student population that receives some kind of financial support, whether it be from small grants to more significant to almost full need help. As I said, I mentioned need-based, and I know that we're going to get into that later, so I won't ruin that part for my colleague on the panel, but you will hear more about the different ways that need shows up, and I look forward to hopefully answering some questions for you this evening.
Thanks so much, Xiomara. I appreciate that. John from Exeter.
Thank you very much, Laura. My name is John Hutchins. I'm the Director of Admissions and Financial Aid at Phillips Exeter Academy in Exeter, New Hampshire. And this is, I have to admit, I'm a little disappointed that we have to be virtual this year. This was an annual trip for me. I got to travel to New York City and see a little bit of the city. And so it was exciting for me every year to be able to make the trip to New York. And so it's not quite the same sitting here at home doing this, but I'm sure we can get through it and convey the same amount of information to you all. Exeter is a boarding school of just under 1,100 students located in Exeter, New Hampshire, which is in the seacoast part of New Hampshire. We have about 49% of our student body, actually 49% of our student body receiving financial aid at Exeter with a total budget of about $25 million. And like my colleagues at other schools, socioeconomic diversity is very important to us. It really goes back to the DNA at Exeter with our founding gift, which said, Exeter shall be open to youth from every quarter. And so it's a very important part of our identity. And so that's something that we value greatly. And so financial aid is a very big part of the application process for the most of our families.
Great. Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. Rebekah.
Good evening. Thank you, Laura. Hi, all. My name is Rebekah Sollitto. I'm the Director of Admissions and Financial Aid here at Poly Prep, which is in Brooklyn. We have two campuses here in Brooklyn, our nursery through 12th grade program. Our full enrollment is about 1,130 students. We're so pleased to be opened in person this year. Our lower school students are in small pods of about 12 or 13. And our 5th through 12th grade students are outside in our tented campus this year, which is going so well. I'm so happy to be here tonight. You know, Laura mentioned that this work can be very personal. I received my own first financial aid award when I was just 6 years old at an independent school in Philadelphia. And it's become such a labor of love for me to be able to help families learn more about financial aid and just to try to be as transparent as we can. I know that's important for all of us tonight to try to help you learn more about how it all works and to be a resource for you this year. Thanks, Laura.
Great. Thanks so much, Rebekah. And Judy.
Hello, thank you all for being with us tonight. I'm Judy Lyons, the admissions director at Westside Montessori School. We are smaller than some of the other schools. We're an early childhood program from 2 to 6. And the school was founded with the idea of having the socioeconomic diversity that one finds on the Upper West Side, where we're located. And 56 years later, we're still doing that. And that's a big focus of the school. Our budget might be smaller, but we have a $1.2 million budget that goes toward our financial aid. We have just under 200 students and about 20% of them are receiving aid. We have half-day programs as well as the full day, which really helps a lot of our working families. It's essentially daycare for their children. And I think all of my colleagues have expressed the real commitment that we all find in this work and how important it is for the school to have that diversity. Everyone benefits from it. And I know in our school, our teachers almost demand it because it really makes teaching in a city school something that's important to them. So this year, things might not be as personal and that we may not be meeting folks, but we certainly want everyone to find this process a comfortable one and as personal as we can make it.
How true. Yeah, so true. Thank you so much, Judy. I'm going to jump into some questions that have typically come up each year on this panel because I think a lot of people are curious about the answers to these questions. And I'm just going to head right into the first question to Rebekah. And the question is, Rebekah, and please feel free to chime in for the rest of you if you want to add to Rebekah's answer. What is financial aid actually and the sources of income for it? And that could be different for different schools, but can you just give kind of a definition of financial aid and the sources of income for it?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's start with the basics, right? We're here tonight to talk about financial aid. So what is financial aid? Well, we're going to start at the very beginning. Many schools use the words financial aid award and financial aid grant to really mean the same thing. And what both of those are for your family is a discount from what the full tuition cost is at a school. So for example, if the full tuition at a school is something like $50,000 and your financial aid grant or your financial aid award is $40,000, then that means that your family will need to pay $10,000 towards tuition. And the thing that I really wanted to clarify is the difference between, the lights in we're trying to work on our sustainability here at Poly Prep. So sometimes my lights will turn off. Hold on one second. I'm gonna turn them back on. Here we go.
You just have to move.
All right, there we go. Sorry about that. I knew that was gonna happen. I was hoping it'd be later on. So the thing I just wanted to really clarify is the difference between what many families apply for very often at the college level, which is a loan, right, that you need to pay back at some point. And that is not the financial aid that we are offering at our schools that we're talking about tonight. So it's not a loan, you don't pay it back. It's a reduction in your tuition obligation to a school. There's another term that a very small number of schools use, which is called a merit scholarship. We don't offer merit scholarships at Poly Prep. We offer need-based financial aid, which means that families need to apply for financial aid. And then if they qualify for financial aid, they receive an award. But there are a small number of schools that offer a merit scholarship, and that just means that you don't need to demonstrate that your family needs financial aid in order to be able to afford a school. So it could be worth asking at the schools that you're looking at whether or not that's on offer. But by and large, when we talk on this call about having a $10 million or $20 million financial aid budget, it really means that each family who receives that support has filled out an application and that they qualify for need-based financial aid. And then one of the other parts of your question, Laura, this one, I hope it doesn't get too murky. One of the other parts of your question was about what are the income sources, like how do schools pay for financial aid? This is something that I certainly didn't understand in my own years as a financial aid recipient, but have really come to learn quite a bit more about the ways that schools can budget for financial aid. It's a pretty interesting insight, I think, right into whether it's your family's values or a school's values. You know, looking at the way that they allocate financial aid can be a great way to understand more about, you know, what a school really values. So that could be helpful to ask as you're looking at other schools too, is a little bit about their overall financial aid budget, how they think about that. Okay, so the overall budget, right? The two basic categories, you've all seen pretty complicated budgets, I bet, in your life, but I like to try to keep it simple. So the one category is money in, and then the other category is money out. So if you are at a school, the largest portion of money in is going to be tuition. And then the two other largest categories are usually giving. So we sometimes call that advancement or donations or annual giving or gifts of whatever. So families can give on top of tuition. So tuition payments, annual giving or gifts to the school, and then draws from endowment. So many independent schools will have endowments of all different sizes, but we'll draw a particular percentage each year. So that's all the money coming into a school. And then the money going out, the hugest bucket for all of us is always going to be faculty and staff salaries and benefits. And then things like paying expenses to keep the lights on and buying books and things like that. And then financial aid is very often one of the largest buckets for money out at a school. So I hope that that helps to clarify that, you know, there isn't some secret way that financial aid, you know, is budgeted or spent. It's really just one of the large categories that schools consider to be an operating expense that goes against the money in. So I open it up if anyone else would like to add to any of those kind of term definitions or just the way we think about budgets at school.
That's an incredible answer. Thank you, Rebekah. Does anyone want to add to that, or should we keep moving? That covers all of us, I think. So that's terrific. So thank you so much. John, I'm going to ask the next one to you. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between need blind and need aware? There are a couple of questions already in the chat about this, about need blind and need aware. So can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure, sure. So I'll start out by saying most schools are going to be need aware in their admissions process. Very, very few schools can actually afford to be need blind in what I would consider to be sort of the most traditional or purest definition of what need blind is. And that definition to me, and again, my colleagues might disagree, but to me, that definition is acting on applications without regard at all to financial status, and then funding 100% of the demonstrated need of all admitted students. That is, in my opinion, to be sort of the most and the traditional definition of need blind. Again, very, very few schools that I know of are able to do this. At some point for most schools, financial aid will have to enter into the calculus of whether they can admit and fund a given student. Now, some schools will say that they're need blind and they will admit a student and then deny financial aid. And they will claim that that is need blind, that they wanted to show the candidate or the applicant or the student or the family that they were deserving of admission, but due to limited resources, they were unable to provide financial assistance. And then, so it's worth talking to schools and asking the question in terms of what does that process look like? But again, for most people, most schools, they're going to be need aware. And what that means is that financial aid will come into play in their decision-making process at some level, at some time, regarding your child's application. And it's tough, and I know that parents don't want to in any way sort of hamstring their child in terms of the application process. And I understand that and I appreciate it. But know that, again, for the majority of families, financial aid is going to enter into their decision-making process in a big way. And so you're not alone in that process. And again, we are all here to help and help guide you through that process. And so as you go through the application process, I believe I speak for my colleagues on the panel when I say we are here to help and we're here to answer your questions both tonight and going forward. And so if you want to ask a school, will this potentially impact my child's likelihood of admission? You can ask that question directly. Again, in probably 95% of the cases, the schools will have to say, yes, it might. It's going to be really hard to know to what extent and to quantify that in a numerical way, but it's worth asking the question.
Great.
So that's, I'll open it up to my colleagues. Rebekah and I were corresponding last week about this very issue, and so I'll open it up to my colleagues if they've got anything to add.
Anything else from anyone? All right, thank you so much, John. We will keep moving, and I'm going to turn the next question over to Jessica. And there's some questions in the chat room already in the Q&A. So could you just talk a little bit about the timeline of the financial aid process and when in the application process do you apply for financial aid, and anything that they need to know about the SSS and the role of the financial officer in the process, please.
Sure, thanks, Laura. So, just in thinking about some of the nuts and bolts for the financial aid application process, while this process varies from school to school, one thing does remain consistent, and that is to leave yourself enough time to submit the application, because the financial aid applications are very thorough, and you'll need to gather a number of documents, and getting started early is really recommended, just to give yourself enough time to also ask the questions that come up along the way. When Laura asked about, the timeline, typically you would, complete your admissions application and indicate that you are going to be applying for financial aid. And then you would get started on your financial aid application when those are available to families. So schools may use their own financial aid application, but most use a third-party management system such as TADS, SSS, or FACS in order to collect, the financial documents and process the applications. Depending which schools you're applying to, you may need to complete financial aid applications with multiple services. Typically, you'll be asked to provide a copy of your tax return, your W-2s and pay stubs. You may be asked to share documents such as credit card statements, bank statements, or student loan statements. Each school will have slightly different requirements, so just keep that in mind. And you'll also have the opportunity to write a letter describing your circumstances to help the financial aid committee better understand your situation. And this can be truly very helpful in case there's additional information about your situation that doesn't really fit neatly into the application itself. So systems such as TADS, SSS, and FACS will collect all your documents and your application in one place. And then these services will analyze the information you provided and send a report to the schools to which you're applying. Get your calendar ready because the deadlines are very important. Most schools will have their financial aid deadlines clearly outlined on their website or on their admissions application, but the deadlines do vary from school to school, so you have to be aware of each individual school's deadlines. Some applications become available as early as October, others in November for applicant families, and some schools will require you to submit everything, as early as December 1st or possibly even earlier at some schools, and some will be due in January. So this can sound like a lot to keep track of, but financial aid officers and directors are there to guide you through the process, to answer any questions along the way. You should really, view all of us and any other financial aid officers as a resource. We often collaborate with members of the financial aid committee in order to support families as they navigate this process. And we really want to hear from you to help make the process as smooth as possible.
That's great, Jessica. And just one question, while your mic is on, there's one question in the chat room. Do you have to pay to fill out these forms, these documents?
That is a great question. Each of these services will have a fee associated with them. However, for most schools, you can also request a fee waiver if that fee truly is too much of a burden. So you can reach out directly to financial aid officers to inquire about that fee waiver.
Yeah, and just a reminder to people that financial aid officers want to make the process as easy as possible for you. And many of the hoops that a family has to jump through are not the individual school hoops, they're other hoops. And so the school really wants to help you jump through all those hoops together. So I'm going to turn the next question over to Xiomara, and just can you talk for a moment about how a financial aid decision is actually made? Mm-hmm. Is it made just by you? Is it made by a whole committee? How do you differentiate between students?
Sure.
If you could talk about that. Thanks.
Absolutely. It's a big one to take a bite out of. So I really welcome my co-panelists to come on in with whatever you would like to add as I try to sort of do it generally, but hopefully accurately. So some schools have financial aid directors and then financial aid officers that where their core work and responsibilities are looking at the financial aid applications of schools, of applicants to their school. Other schools, as is represented here by my colleagues in the panel, where they're wearing multiple roles, where they're wearing an admissions director role as well as a financial aid hat. And so in some situations, it's specifically a financial aid committee. In some situations, it's the financial aid officers I mentioned, with maybe a representative from the admissions office as well. Different schools have different policies around whether or not those are two separate decisions that are made, acceptance and financial aid versus whether or not one informs but doesn't necessarily decide upon the other. And I just want to be really clear about that. Someone having both admissions and financial aid in their title does not mean that all decisions are always wedded. That's really, really important to know, because I saw a question about, well, if I'm denied for financial aid, do I get denied admissions and vice versa? And that's really individual by school, but I think I can say pretty safely that that is something that schools are really trying to avoid being able to do. which is, like I said, marry the two decisions. So Jessica mentioned how there are these services that collect and analyze. However, the decision about the financial aid award is ultimately at the discretion of each school. And each school has set their own priorities around spending. So whether it's the discount rate that Rebekah mentioned, or around if they're actually looking at revenue as opposed to discount. So once each school has sort of set its priorities around enrollment, then the very well done work of these collection services are used as a launching point for the actual ultimate decisions that schools will give you. And Rebekah will talk later around maybe why two different schools might give you two different awards. It really is based around a lot of those things. So in general, I can tell you that schools will look at your income as well as your assets, right? The things that are liquid assets and the things that are like savings. They will look at then your financial responsibilities in relation to that. And when I say financial responsibilities, I'm now referring to debt. So there is an unbelievable science and I call it the skeleton of science, but the art that's built around it, the body, that is the nuance that schools bring to figuring this information out. At the end of the day, we want families to understand that independent school is an investment by the parent and the child to be able to attend that school. And so that investment for one family might be able, if they can only pay $500 a year, but for another family where they can actually pay much more of the freight. But the thing is that it's an investment, and it's about looking at how to best provide socioeconomic access and not thinking about financial aid as a subsidy for the kinds of things that make up a family's financial landscape. So looking at income, looking at assets, looking at debt and financial responsibilities are all the core pieces that go into it. But then the nuances might be things like, how many children do you have in other tuition paying schools? That might also influence the way in which a school looks at what your capacity to pay is on paper versus what your actual capacity might be. And then schools, for example, Chapin will look at discretionary income and where spending is going there for a family, because again, independent school is about an investment in your child, right? So schools will usually have an approach of what can a family equitably and sustainably be asked to contribute in the investment of their child. And then the other remaining amount, a school that has loved your family and through the process and really wants to see your child and family thrive in the school community, they will then meet you where your investment is right, equitably and sustainably reached, will meet you there. And so I hope I hit on some of the big pieces. Does anyone want to throw in other sort of nuances that you might use in your deliberation that I may not have hit on?
I think the only thing I would add too is that it's a sacrifice. You know, regardless of how much money a family has, if you have very little or a lot, and a lot of families that have a lot of money apply for financial aid because they don't want to sacrifice something else in their life.
Exactly.
And that's not okay. There's a sacrifice. You have to get rid of something.
Right.
But people that really, really need support, we will be able to tell as schools. And so it really is a sacrifice and it's an investment, right?
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. And I definitely know that I have had some, you know, a little bit of, I've had a few bumpy or tricky conversations where I had to explain what that investment was like. And that has become a little bit of a tagline that it's meant to provide socioeconomic access, not subsidy. And that means that choices, that families sit down together, right? So Jessica, when she said make a timeline, it's also really sit down and have a hard look and an honest look at where your family is and what you can possibly be able to do to support your child's investment.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Xiomara. Thank you. And Judy, can you just talk a little bit, and this will also answer some questions in the chat, just life after the financial aid process, the reapplication process. I remember as a parent, when I was going through this process every year we had to reapply and we had to get the paperwork out, and it was important to spend the time to do that, the confidentiality of an award, and then the family's role in the school. If you could talk about that, please.
Well, I think we've all really talked about how important it is to our schools to have this diversity. And one of the things that is important is the confidentiality. I know in our school, I'm probably the one person that knows, as well as the person who, is in billing. But our teachers don't know, our head of school doesn't know, she doesn't want to know. And I think parents should really understand that while we're there to support families, we also feel that it should be confidential. We want to include families in every aspect of life in the school. And I do think most independent schools over the years, certainly in the years that my children were in school, have really changed a lot of the kinds of activities so that families are comfortable. Things are brought into the school rather than people's homes. If there's some kind of activity, a benefit, some activities for the children, most of us provide complimentary tickets to our families so that they can be part of it. Those are questions that are okay to ask, for especially in ongoing schools. If there are trips, if there are going to be expenses that you as a family would really find onerous, you've got to ask about that and know that the admissions office, the financial aid office, wants to let you feel comfortable in part of the school in every aspect. But that's something that you can certainly feel comfortable asking about. I know that Laura mentioned the yearly process of application. That's very important. We all have auditors that look at the finances of our school, and especially all of us who are non-for-profit, we have to show how our money is spent. And it might be a year that the auditors are going to come in and look at that aspect. So we have to be above board with that. And that's one of the reasons you have to apply every year. Families' finances have changed from year to year. We've had families who during the course of the year might lose a job, lose some income. Certainly this year with COVID-19 brought tremendous change. We reached out to all our families in the summer and certainly had families who had never applied for financial aid needed to apply for the first time. And we were quite pleased that we had the finances to be able to do that. But a school does have budgets. Most of us set aside monies that can help a family who is in a financial crisis for a while. So again, you should always ask about those things, but that's why it's also important from the beginning to share the information that's necessary with the office and apply. Don't go into this thinking, well, we can handle a year or two and then we'll apply, because sometimes the money might not be there. So be upfront from the beginning. Even if your award decreases over the years as your finances become better, or one partner returns to a job, from the beginning, have that honest relationship with a school, because you're going into this for some time, and you want your child, your family to be comfortable there. So feel comfortable asking those questions. What is covered? What additional expenses can we anticipate? And is there relief for those, like trips and such? So know that we're here to help you. And it's important to be as upfront as you need to be, and realize that you can ask the questions. It's not going to jeopardize. I'd much rather talk to a family who has read everything, who has questions, than someone says, oh, I didn't read that part. I didn't read the full application. So we're here to help you, but you have to do your homework.
Great. Thank you so much, Judy. I really appreciate that. Speaking of, you brought up the pandemic, and I'm wondering if a few of you can talk about this. I know some schools we started a student access fund, which is more of a grant to help a family get through a difficult time. It could be a family that's never applied for financial aid, but because they lost a business or lost a job, they felt like now they had to. I said to my board of trustees, I do not want to lose one family because they lost income from the pandemic. So what can we do to get them from here to there? I'm wondering if you all can talk a little bit about that kind of grant money versus financial aid, because sometimes financial aid is ongoing year to year, and then some, it's just a grant just to get you through the next, the next phase. Rebekah?
Sure. So one thing that Judy said that was so important, right, is the importance of reapplying every year for financial aid. So another really important piece of that, though, is that while you do have to reapply every year for financial aid, the language that we use at Poly Prep that I think is pretty common among schools is that you can expect a very similar financial aid award from one year to the next, provided that your income and assets, don't change dramatically. So if you're in a pretty similar financial aid situation, I don't want any family to worry that if you're admitted in kindergarten with financial aid, that suddenly, it's on the line in first grade or ninth grade. Schools really do commit for the lifetime of a child at a school to funding them when they commit to that original financial aid award. And that reason why I brought that up just now is because of the difference between admitting a family with financial aid and making that long-term commitment versus what we call here, emergency financial aid, which is a slightly different type of document, really. And it lets families know that this is for 1 year, that this is to help you because of a situation that you encountered, like a pandemic, and for us to be able to budget for that in a slightly different way than we budget for the ongoing awards that we're really committed to for the lifespan of students. So for example, at Poly Prep, there were 40 families that applied for emergency financial aid as a result of the pandemic. There were 32 of those families who qualified for emergency financial aid because the process is still pretty different. You can't really have hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings, and you do still need to qualify. And those families will receive, the notification that that this award have already received the notification that it's a 1-year award. So I just wanted to, as Laura said, really clarify the difference between the way that schools can help families temporarily versus the ongoing kind of commitment financially.
Thank you, Rebekah. Anyone else want to chime in there? Yes, Xiomara.
Yes, thank you. So very similar to Rebekah, there was a process that we had where we let families know that there could be a 1-year option. It was like a COVID relief fund was what we called it. And then we actually, over the course of the summer, as we saw that there really isn't a light at the end of the tunnel, we realized that we needed to pivot again to be able to support to support families beyond sort of that temporary tuition grant or tuition award. And we actually have come up with sort of a small, sort of almost cash in hand relief fund, because we realized that there were some families who were saying, thank you for that tuition. And now that, you're doing hybrid, like there were new expenses either around transportation or things like that. That really were unexpected. And so that's something that I think is important, that each school is going to do their very best to maintain their families, right? So Laura, to what you said about your policy at Masters, Rebekah, what you said at Poly Prep, each school is going to do whatever was in their capacity to do because they are committed to families. And that's the heart, right? That's the personal part of the financial aid process that goes beyond the numbers, is when a family says, everything that you did helped and still. And there being an open communication, which I think is important, that we haven't really said it right yet, but that the director of financial aid build a rapport with families, so that having the connection to communicate and build relationship is really, really key when people are talking about some of the most sensitive areas of their life, and being able to talk about what you need so that a school can really help you.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to try to generalize one question here, because I think a lot of people, I know I hear this every year from families, and I would love to hear your answers. And the dilemma is that and this is a person that says, it looks like I make more than I really take home. And this always hurts my financial aid possibilities and the applications that say to kind of fill in the blank, and I never have a chance to describe my situation. Can you talk a little bit about that, or can someone talk about that? John, yes, thank you. Please go ahead.
Sure. I'm happy to talk about that. And I think I saw that same question maybe in the Q&A. And so
Yeah.
it's not uncommon for self-employed people to say exactly what you just said, or a paraphrased version of that. And there are ways for, and I agree, in terms of the forms and filling in the blank, it might not show the true picture. And that's where writing that supplemental letter can provide additional context, and also in many cases providing supplemental documentation. And so, for example, if you have an S Corp or a partnership, those will show distributions or lack thereof, even though those pass-through entities will pass income onto your personal tax return, and it will absolutely, I understand this, look like you had an infusion of cash from either of those two entities, when in fact you took nothing out of either the S Corp or the partnership. And so you can provide that supplemental documentation in addition to writing that letter. And most financial aid directors are happy to look at that and factor that into the decision-making process as much as their policies allow.
Great, thank you so much. Can any of you speak to the question from Gina, which is, she's hearing that special education schools are needing parents to fund possibly 2 years up front before the Department of Education funding comes through. How are families handling this? And if no one does know that answer, I really suggest, Gina, that you be in touch with the Parents League, because I know they will have, or maybe Gina, you have that answer. If anyone has that answer.
I don't have that answer. However,
Okay.
I would advise that family to contact the Parents League, and they could speak to our special needs advisor, who are well versed in this process and could answer that question.
Okay, great. What about the question about what is expected or what is the expected or average ratio of tuition to income? I think that's going to be hard to answer right now because it depends on the whole package. It's not just about your income. Am I correct on that? Okay.
Yeah, it is. And when we were talking earlier about how financial aid is determined, income is designed to be the primary driver. Assets will come into play in a decision-making process at an increasing level depending upon total net worth. But it's designed to be driven by income, but there are too many other variables to come up with a simple ratio.
Great. Okay, and can one or two of you talk about, do schools think about financial aid in terms of individual children or families? Is it a disadvantage to that you need extra financial aid for twins entering 9th grade because schools would allocate significant resources to one family rather than 2 or more? I'm sure schools deal with this differently, that we'll take this one child but not 2, which I think most schools would do the opposite. But depending on who's qualified and who's not. But can you all talk about that?
I mean, I'm happy. Oh yeah, Rebekah, you had your hand up.
Yep, and then Xiomara?
Yeah, well, yeah, go ahead, Rebekah.
Sorry, sure. So for us, we really look at an individual student where we are trying to, yes, we are trying to kind of maximize the number of students who receive financial aid, but not the number of families who receive financial aid. So having twins or triplets, God bless, that certainly doesn't have an impact on our interest in supporting a family. If those families are, if we're interested in admitting them, they've qualified for financial aid. I actually thought you were going to go in a different direction, Laura. This is a question that we get all the time, which is that if you have one child enrolled who receives financial aid, and then you're applying a second child, does your tuition contribution double? And I think that schools do handle this a little bit differently. What we do at Poly Prep is once we've determined, or once our partners at TADS, right, they're the people with all the fancy forms and stuff, once TADS has determined how much your family can contribute, that stays the same, so that if there's another child who comes in, or a third or a fourth, you know, that your family's overall contribution is still going to be the same. I hope that helps.
And I think Xiomara said it too, having the number of children you have in tuition charging schools is one of the biggest factors to awards. So having multiple children, whether they're in your school or in other schools, really indicates a greater need.
Okay, great. Will asking for a fee waiver negatively impact the application review?
Absolutely not.
Why?
Because we would sorry, I'm not saying we, meaning all independent schools, but you guys can thumb up or ditto.
Yeah.
I'm saying absolutely not for all schools. The reason why that I would give as someone who's done financial aid is that, you know, we would never want that to be a hurdle to your child actually being able to show their best self as part of the admissions process. So there is no negativity assigned with asking for fee waivers. There is no negativity assigned to even applying for aid. That's one thing that we didn't talk about was if you think you can squeeze by for 1 year, is it better to get in the door and then apply for financial aid the next year because you think it's going to affect the admissions decision? Don't do that. Like, we want families to be, like I said, have a great, you know, an honest look at what you're able to do, and allow the school to meet you at your line of investment. Like, that is the best thing that you can do. And that open line of communication is key. So applying for these things does not harm you, because we are schools that have said that this is a level of diversity that we're committed to. So to put that up as a hurdle in your way would be counter to what we have said as a school, as schools, that we are committed to providing for families.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you. Do families, are you made aware if you will be receiving financial aid and what percentage of tuition will be covered by financial aid before accepting a spot at a school? And John, I know there's a difference between boarding and day in New York City, and I'm wondering if people can talk a little bit about that. If a family's applying to a city school and then also to a boarding school for older kids, how do your schools handle that?
We provide financial aid information at the time of admission. So students will find out when they're admitted, the amount of financial responsibility, if any, that the family will have.
Okay.
And I think actually it goes to principles of good practice for all independent schools, that's something that I think just about every school will do. They're not going to ask anybody to sign on the dotted line without full knowledge of what they're getting into financially.
And what about the deadlines for acceptance? Are there principles of good practice for that? Like you have to let's say there's a family in the audience right now that's applying to all of our schools. Do they have to let all of our schools know on that same day?
So the deadline for most New York City day schools is going to be different than the deadline for boarding schools. Most of us in New York are members of ISAGNY, the Independent School Admissions Association of Greater New York. And one of the most important parts of being a member in that group is the unity around the deadlines. You'll hear from all the schools on the same day, financial aid and your admissions decision, and your response is due back to the school at the same time. But there is a slightly different deadline for boarding schools. And by and large, you know, if you're waiting for a decision from a boarding school, you can often talk to a day school about your situation and try and find out whether or not there's any flexibility in your family's decision-making process.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
go ahead, John. Go ahead.
One question we get all the time, and I don't believe it's been addressed tonight, is what if my financial aid is not enough? What if I get my decision and it's not enough? And again, I'm seeing my colleagues nod, and I think I speak for all of us when I say, if that's the case, please give us a call. and we can talk about it, and we may ask for additional information. It may change the grant, it may not change the grant, but we are certainly open to those conversations. And again, I think I speak for my colleagues when I say to put up another school's grant and say, why did this school give me more, is not a good strategy to take. In general, a great deal of time and thought has gone into the grant amount that schools will give a given family. And so it's not, it just doesn't go over all that well, frankly. But again, if it's not enough, please give us a call and we're open to those conversations.
Does anyone else want to answer that?
Yeah, just to jump in quickly to say, I agree with you, John. You know, that's a hard strategy, but that also, boy, can it be confusing to families to get two totally different awards from two different schools, or maybe even two similar schools, right? So I think one of the common themes I hope you're hearing tonight is just that we are really open to the conversations and understand how difficult it can be to navigate. For example, there might be a school that has 25 openings in 6th grade and another school that has 0 openings in 6th grade. Well, that's probably going to change the way that the school allocates financial aid for that particular grade level. There's just so many reasons why awards might be different at different schools. And we understand that that could be a challenge for you as well. It's just one of the many things that we're happy to talk to you about either throughout the season or during decision time.
Right, thank you. One question is, my compensation is commission-based. One year I could afford the full tuition, but may not the next year. How would you factor this into consideration? Jessica?
I think most families would do, I mean, most in financial aid committees would look at it and maybe do an income averaging. And usually some of the information is asked the year before, the current year, and then what one anticipates earning in the future. So again, I think I don't think we can say this often enough, but sharing that information, writing a narrative, giving perhaps a 5-year timeline, it would help a school. So it wouldn't just be the hard and facts from the application that you've submitted through SSS or TADS. It would also be that personal touch that a committee is going to look at your specific situation.
Great.
We even oftentimes the kind of emergency grants that people have talked about will have families that have something that comes up, the monies will be given, and will understand that it's going to take them another year to catch up. Those monies might help for tuition that year, but the family still has a setback. So if the information is shared, we're in the position then to say, well, the following year, yes, your income has gone up a bit, maybe even significantly, but there's a lot of catch up. And I think we all understand that and want to do what is best for each family personally, but you have to give the information.
Okay, thank you. One question that I often get, and I don't know if it's down, I'm sorry we won't be able to get to all of the questions. We're running out of time. There's some really great questions here, and I wish we had time to answer all of them. One question I often get is, does the money run out? So if I'm waitlisted at a school and I really want to go to that school, and so I'm going to say no to a couple of schools that I've been accepted to, and if I get accepted to the waitlisted school, is there going to be any money there? Does anyone want to answer that?
I'm going to say that that's probably very individual for each school.
Cool.
Some schools plan for a waitlist financial aid activity, but it's, in my experience, it's never been a budget that mirrored the budget that was allotted during the acceptance season, for lack of a better way of putting it. So I think that that's very individual to school, and that's definitely an opportunity when you receive a waitlist letter from a school to ask what their policy is around their ability to provide financial aid if they move to waitlist or round 2 or whatever the school calls it. Yeah.
Great. So I know we have to end, and I think Blair, you are getting some of these questions that I'm hoping that we can answer in a different way. I would just like to end, and I know it's a little past 8, Gina, I'm sorry, but one sentence or two from each of you, your best piece of advice for the families that are listening tonight, going into this year, going into the process, particularly with, going into the election. The pandemic is still with us. There's a lot of unrest. There's a lot of insecurity. One bit of advice for these families that are listening tonight. And who would like to begin?
I'll just start by saying, maybe it's redundant, but we're here for you. It's for many of us, this is our whole job, is to try to support you. No question is too big, no question is too small. We really want to help make this process as clear and transparent for you. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Gina.
Mm-hmm.
I'll also go by saying that pay attention to individual school websites and deadlines. Make sure if you're an organized person, definitely, whether it's create a spreadsheet, do whatever it is that helps you to organize which schools use which platforms, their deadlines, and just making sure, because most schools also have FAQs on their page, and that's where you can get a lot of the answers to some of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat. You can find a lot of those answers on the individual school FAQs. So just good luck and watch those deadlines.
I'd agree with both of those. I'd also say that I know SSS, and I'm sure TADS does too, offers a lot of help to families. So you can use those services if you've got any questions about some of the finances. Of course, you can always come to the individual schools, but those services provide, and I think SSS, I know, is even doing evening workshops for parents coming up, and I'm sure TADS is doing something like that too. So take advantage of those opportunities to get some advice.
Thank you, Judy.
I just wanted to second what Rebekah said. That was the first thing that came to my mind as well, just that we really are here for you. Laura, you said a lot of things that show what a challenging and daunting time this can be, but we really are so excited to get to know your families. And even though applying for financial aid and going through the admissions process can feel hard, just know that there is a lot of joy too in thinking about where your child will be in a year from now.
Great, thank you. John?
Yeah, Jessica, I really appreciate you talking about the joy that's part of this process. And I think that that's absolutely a big part of it in terms of families going through the admissions process. And it can be fun and enjoyable as well. I know that this part of it can be a little intimidating. But as far as my advice is concerned, provide more information, err on the side of providing more information than less information, less opportunity for schools to have to assume or make their own decisions about any uncertain information. So I would say err on the side of providing more information, more documentation than less. And just as my colleagues have indicated, know that you are valued and that we welcome these applications and that we want to get to know you, your family, and your children in this decision-making process. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. And I'll just end by saying yes to all of what all the things that you said. And there's so much joy on our campuses, and we want this to be a process that that you do find some joy. And I think there can often be shame around socioeconomic needs, and we are here to help work through that with you, because we don't want that in any of our families. So I want to thank, I'm so sorry I didn't get to all the questions. They were really outstanding questions. I'm going to turn it over to Gina, and I want to thank my colleagues in your amazing schools, and what we're offering is exceptional. So thank you so much. And Gina, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank all of you, and I kept my promise. This truly was a very informative evening, and I hope that everyone learned, first and foremost, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid to apply for financial aid. Do not be afraid to answer questions. It's clear just by this panel how much they want to help and engage you. So thank you all. And if you have, please email us at info@parentsleague.org and we can help answer more of the questions. They are amazing. There were so many, but I wish you all the best of luck and have a great evening. Thank you.